Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. To subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platforms, please visit us at www.thewisdomcircle.com.
Welcome to the Wisdom Circle. We are here today, as we are every time, with my friend Tony Ponturo and colleague, and a very special guest, David Verklin, Hall of Fame broadcaster, industry legend, currently senior advisor at the Boston Consulting Group. Tony, of course, was, king of all sports media at Anheuser-Busch and other marketing efforts. So we have a great group here. I mean, really exciting. And David and I work together a little bit, and we're here to talk about his vision, because he is a visionary, what he sees going forward, what he's doing now. We have those little tent poles we like to talk about, journey and mistakes and surprises and all sorts of fun stuff. So we're really excited about having you. David, thank you out there on the West Coast for an early rise. We appreciate that. And so, Tony, how do you feel today? How's it going? What do you want to talk about?
That's an open-ended question.
I know.
No, everything's good. Since for some of you that have been listening to us over the last year and a half, actually had a little reunion of sort of the six horsemen, as I called it, here in Hilton Head. People that were part of the core of our media department from the mid-'80s all the way to 2008 and a little bit beyond. Billions of dollars of media and thousands of negotiation. Mark Wright, I'm going to name him: Mark Wright, Peter McLaughlin, Rich Michael, Steve Bargosian, Mike McGowan, and myself. And it was a really amazing, David, just to bring you into this a little bit, where we've talked a little bit about, Ray and I are both big believers in the human side of business. There's a lot of smart people, but particularly as you're interfacing with negotiations and acquiring assets, and in our case, trying to make sure our competitors didn't get things like Super Bowl and other things. My best analogy was that it almost felt like a reunion of a platoon group that had all gotten together, who had fought the front lines and survived, and were now telling the old battle stories. But it was just a very special thing, and I won't belabor it other than just to remind people that, especially the young people, that the relationships you're making today, if you do it right, will last a lifetime. And we sort of proved that, over 3.5 days at Hilton Head with the group that basically propped me up for a long time. So that was great to hear. So anyway, we'll get into the real meaty stuff, and Ray, I'll let you start that process.
Sure. So David, excited to have you on. And it goes back to what Tony just said. You and I have known each other for over 20 years. Tony and I go back that. We don't like to go too much back in the day, because we're trying to stay current and hip. And that one of the reasons you're here, because no one more current than you. So, but to do that for just a minute, because I think everybody would be interested, how you found yourself. Everyone you speak to, young guys and gals in the media business, they all have the place where they want to wind up. And, I usually tell them, if you think you have any idea where you're going to wind up, you probably need to think that through. Mm-hmm. So what was your journey? Where did you want to be? I wanted to be a DJ on WNEW FM, and I wound up being a buyer of network radio, which led to a career. What was your pre-career thought of, here's what I'd like to do? And did it all turn out that way, or just a little bit about that for a minute or two?
Yes, glad to. I watched your last podcast with Joe Yuva, also a guy who I'm a huge fan of, and so I'm very honored to be on the Wisdom Circle. So thank you very much for including me. My journey is kind of interesting, I think. I'm the son of a dentist from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. One of 4 kids, and I had no intention ever of being in the advertising business. My intention in my house, my brother is an orthopedic surgeon. My dad was an oral surgeon and dentist. And the plan was for me to become a either a physician or a dentist. I went to the University of Virginia, and I think that the formative part of my life actually was that my grandmother owned in Pittsburgh an appliance store, Community Radio and Electric. We sold washing machines, we sold stoves, we sold even televisions, small appliances. And I started working at my grandmother's store in seventh grade. And when the store got busy, I would be pulled out of the repair department, which is where I worked, and I would deal with customers and sell vacuum cleaners and irons. Remember those days? You bought a toaster, like there were two brands, like Westinghouse and General Electric, and so I became a bit of a salesman at starting in seventh grade. And for those of you that know me, that probably helps explain a lot of where I focused in the ad business. I tended to be very focused in business development, and new business was really, really where I spent enormous amount of my time. And I hope we'll talk about that. But my plan after graduating from the University of Virginia was to go to Wall Street. And so I was really just and go back to business school. So I was going to go back to business school, and I was really just looking for something to do for a couple of years. And I used Frank Sinatra really as my career coach. He had a song when I graduated, New York, New York, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And I thought, I'll go to New York for a couple of years. I'll go back and get an MBA, and I'll become a bond trader in Wall Street. And what happened was I got a job at Young and Rubicam, and in New York. I have a job off. I was thinking about advertising. I was thinking about PR. I was thinking about the movie business. I was thinking about being a page at NBC. I was just looking for something to do for a couple of years. You guys have certainly met other guys on this broadcast that have had similar backgrounds. And I thought advertising sounded pretty cool. Felt a little bit like Hollywood, son of a dentist. And I was lucky enough to get hired in a media department run by a guy named Joe Ostro. I worked for his number two person, a lady named Polly Langbort, and I worked on the Johnson & Johnson account. My first account was Johnson's Baby Powder, Johnson's Baby Oil, all the Johnson's Baby products. And that's how I started my ad business, my ad career at Young and Rubicam. And you'll meet a number of people, like each of us. Back then, in that era of advertising, there was a group of people that worked at DMB&B that were very focused. Group of people at Benton and Bowles under a guy named Phil Garasio. There was Joe Ostro. There was Julie Fine over at Ogilvy. And anyway, so that was kind of my entry into the ad business, into the media side of the business. And like other people, I found out that I actually seem to have some kind of aptitude for this. And the rest is history, Jensen. Here I sit talking to you 50 years later.
That's a great story. Yeah, Tony, you have a question for David? Sound like
No, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, just so PR, communications, Hollywood, Y&R. Was there a line into Y&R? Long story short, I got an interview with Ted Bates because I had a cousin in the media department, and there was an opening in the network radio group, and I went like radio. What was your entry? What was your contact?
I had no contacts. If you really want to know, I had no contacts in the ad business, zero.
That's an important lesson.
And so what I had to come up with a unique way to get a job. And so what I did is I sent a resume to the head of account management. Back then, there were three departments: creative, account service, and media. There's also production, something called traffic. But those were the three departments. And back then, you really needed an MBA back then to get in account management. But I sent my resume to the heads of account management at Y&R, Ogilvy, a bunch of places. And back then they would call you back, and I got an interview from lady at Y&R, and she said, well, why do you want to be in account management? I said, actually, I don't want to be in account management. I'd really like to be in media. And people back then, it's a lesson for all of you with resumes. What people love to do is get their resume off of their desk. You know what I mean? And she said, well, gee, I'll send that over to Joe Ostro in the media department. And so my resume ended up on his desk coming internally. And that's how I got the interview. So I actually applied for account management. Every time they would say, are you interested in account management? I would say, actually, no, I'm not. I'm really interested in media. And without contacts, that's how I got my interviews. And again, the rest is history.
Well, in the 70s, mid 70s, when Ray and I came into the business, I won't say it was the media department was a bunch of misfits, but it was sort of people that didn't really know what they wanted to do, right? As you said, the account I did not have a master's degree, although I was an NBC page. And I always would tell people who would want to listen that my master's degree was being an NBC page. And the reason I say that was we had to give tours. We had to give 5 tours a day for an hour and entertain 25 people. And so to me, that was learning how to present, learning how to stand in front of 25 people, not have, uh, stage fright, and make sure you've entertained them and got them involved. Now that's not all an MBA gives you, but I always use that as my MBA. But it was sort of an interesting crowd, and I'm now going back through. I'm now on season 6 of 7 of Mad Men. Of course, that was in the '60s. But when you
Yes.
said, David, the media department was sort of like the account guys ran the business, the creative guys, were smoking dope in the
Kings.
back room, and the media department was sort of like, okay, I guess television's coming on. We better get someone to be the media
Oh, yeah, I
department.
had 2 stories that you guys may find, and then we can move on to more modern things. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but I actually did have one contact. One of my friends from the University of Virginia knew Bob Blackmore. If any of you knew
Oh, yeah.
Bob Blackmore, the head of ad sales at NBC,
Yeah.
legend, absolute legend in the business.
Yeah.
Using him, I got an interview with Bob Blackmore in 19, I'm not even tell you the year,
Okay.
early. And Bob said, I said to Bob, you know what I'd like to do is I'd like to be in network TV sales. That's what I think I'd like to do. I'd be good at it. Bob said, well, typically it takes a little bit more than an undergraduate education to start in network TV sales. You can start as a page. I might be able to help you, and we went through the whole page program. And he said, but I got a different idea for you. Why don't you go work in the agency business for a couple of years and then call me up? And frankly, Bob passed away not long ago, but Bob, it was really Bob. That was how I ended up, going after the agency business. It was actually, I always give credit to, it was Bob Blackmore that sent me on that path. So you
That's the
just
best
never know
advice you can.
who's gonna influence your life. And he
Yeah.
was a wonderful guy. I'll never forget when he came back to see me when I'm running an agency, maybe like 10 years later. Bob comes to see me and says, gee, Willikers, David, what a crazy world this is. Now I'm calling on you. And anyway, it's a funny business. I'm so proud to have been a part of it.
Yeah.
It is. I'll tell one story about Mad Men, because for those out there who are hearing and seeing us, it is a legendary television show if you haven't seen it. But there's a account management guy giving a tour of the agency to a prospective client. And it's all beautiful offices and, like, the drink card and beautiful, executive assistants, we'll call them. And then he opens up a door, and all you hear is the click and clack of, adding machines, and telephones are ringing. And he says, media department's in there. That's where we make all the money.
Yeah. But, I think, the three of us have really been, I believe the ad business really is in its kind of, at least in my lifetime. I've always said I've been in the business of commercial persuasion, by the way, which is what I think I am as a professional in the business of commercial persuasion, because I've worked on political campaigns. There's almost nothing I haven't sold, really, if you want to talk about it. But after this many years, but I think there was the full service agency business, or the full service agency revolution. That's where I started, and you guys started kind of when media and creative were together, and the creative was kind of king. And I spent the media was the last 15 minutes of the presentation, right? My whole life, I saw people go like this to me constantly. You remember this move? Wrap it up, because and then the second phase, I think, was a phase that the three of us were very much involved in, which I would, we were lucky enough to be part, I think, particularly Tony, you were part enough to be part of the creative revolution. I mean, there was a time, you think about Bud's, you think of the beer advertising, you think of some of the work. I went to Hal Riney and Partners and moved to the West Coast, and I think there was the West Coast creative revolution. Wyden and Kennedy started doing work for Nike. Chiat Day was doing work for Apple. We did Saturn. We did Bartles and James, Perrier. You saw Fallon McGilligan do Perception and Reality, the generic ad campaign. I mean, there was a bunch of really wonderful work. Tony, you got a chance to approve it. I just remember the work that was coming out of AB. August the 3rd had an eye for creative, and he wanted a lot of, and he wanted it to be good. So I think that was fun. The third phase was really the media services revolution, right? When media and creative were broken apart. And I certainly was a part of that, bringing the Cara brand to the United States and North America and South America and Asia. And then I think the fourth revolution is the one that we're kind of just ending, which is the digital media revolution. And we're entering the fifth, which the three of us are lucky enough, I think, to be part of, which is the AI revolution. So it's really been kind of for me, I'd be glad to talk about, any of
Yeah,
those phases of my life and the four kind of careers I've had. Advertising, I ran a cable TV company. I've been in private equity, and I now am in the management consulting business. So that's kind of a matrix for our conversation, if you'd like to think about it.
that's next. Tony, you want to go
Yeah,
go
well,
in there?
you talked about innovation, and I'll springboard off AB a little bit. In 1985, we took all of our national broadcast in-house, which started the Bush Media Group. And in 91, really the end of 91, beginning of 92, took all the media in-house. And I'm a firm believer that that did a couple of things. One is we took a 15% or 17.65% gross media fee down to 3% for our company. So that, and so said we can do this with 150 people, which also had sports marketing, for not paying 75 million, paying 15 million. But more importantly, it opened up the creative breadth, because no disrespect to the big agencies, because we all started there, but now you could go to the David Verklin, Ray Warren creative shop, in this case Hal Riney, that didn't necessarily have all the tools in the beginning, and say, we just need good creative ideas because we're doing all the business side over here. I also think, from an innovation standpoint, and I have no factual backup for this, but all of a sudden the agency said, wait a minute, and GM followed a little bit with GM Works, but it was a joint venture with their agency. No one else started to do it just on their own. Um, and I think we lost Ray a little bit here, but
I had a moment to close the door.
okay. But that created all the media shops, the Starcoms, the Media Mess, and the Omnicoms. So, but anyway, it is about innovation. And David, what I'm curious about is, of all the things you innovated, whether it was agency or brands or political position, what are the one or two that you're most proud of?
Well, I would. It kind of gets really into the heart of this podcast. I think. I guess the first thing I would say would be culture, the culture of the company that I created, along with others, including Ray was part of it. Ray and I worked together in 2006. We pitched a business called Walmart, which I hope we'll talk about and get that on record, and won it together. But the culture we created at Cara was a bit of the Pirates versus the Navy. We were the challenger brand, right? We came into the United States. Cara did not exist in the United States in 1998. It was a very large brand in Europe. You guys knew it. Chuck Fruit knew the brand. I think Chuck was maybe at Coke at the time and was a client.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were all friends of Chuck. What a guy. And so, I was asked to bring Cara to North America and South America. And we were a media services only shop. We did not have the creative capability, as you know, versus an unbundled shop, right? The brands you mentioned, at either OMD or Starcom, which was a brutal competitor, and others. And so we had to start from scratch. So I did it by acquisition. So I guess the first thing, I bought 30 companies in 10 years, 3 a year, and every year for 10 years. So Cara was built by acquisition and integration. But we were a challenger, and I used to preach, we're the Pirates versus the Navy a lot.
No,
The
David,
other companies
let me stop you there, just so
Yeah.
I understand, but our guests understand. 30 media buying companies, or what were these companies that you bought?
Well, I really had the vision that once you got a client, you needed to try to get all their work. So yes, in some cases it was geography. I bought a media agency in L.A. We bought a media agency in New York, but I also bought an analytics company. We were really a
Okay.
pioneer in market mix modeling with a company called MMA that you may. So I bought an analytics company. We bought Velocity Sports and Marketing. So I wanted to get in
Okay.
that business.
Cool.
And Ray will also tell you that we also were a very entrepreneurial shop. We would try to start a new business at Cara every year. And I would encourage employees to bring me an idea. And if I liked it, I'd fund it. And we got into corporate trade, for example, with Kathy Kladopoulos, that we had kind of invented that business. Really, all the other agencies, as you may remember, Ray followed us into the trade business
Yeah.
as we pioneered that. So I kept buying different businesses, either in geography, an agency in Mexico, an agency in Argentina, or adding additional services. And back then, Tony, in particular, I was one of the largest buyers of back then of kind of small independent digital agencies. And that's how we
Okay.
built what was called Cara Fusion at the time and eventually became integrated within Cara. But
Did
the
So,
culture was really, you asked me what I was most proud of. I was really most proud of the kind of the culture we created. It was it was a bit of a benevolent dictatorship, I may say, and we can discuss that. But I tried to take all the heat from our owners in London and let our teams do the work. I feel
yeah.
like one of the jobs of a CEO is to keep the flies off the meat, and I did my best
I
to
used an
avoid.
umbrella term. I'm like, the CEO's got to be like the traveler's umbrella. You just, everything, everybody underneath stays dry. You're the umbrella. You get kind of wet.
Yes, so
but
we
I
Hey,
created a
David.
assume, I want to let Ray take
very
over here, but
competitive culture.
I
Yeah.
assume
Go
you
ahead,
had to
Tony.
convince the mothership, meaning I assume Cara was based in London, but I don't know that for a fact.
Yes,
So
Aegis Group.
someone was underwriting your acquisitions. I don't think you were making that revenue from US, but I could be wrong. Didn't you have to convince the mothership to give you the resources to go buy
No,
these
quite the opposite, Tony. I was hired to do it.
Okay.
We had been Aegis Group PLC was a publicly traded company in the UK, maybe the 100th largest company in the UK, but it was just a European media services company, the largest in Europe, by the way, just so we know. So this was both you guys should know Cara, the brand in Europe. It's a gorilla. It still is. It is huge. But they had no presence in North America, South America, or Asia. So they hired me from Hal Riney. I was a unique hire in the United States at the time because I was the only, and I say this, I'm trying to say this with humility, but it just so happened, I was the only media guy with general management experience. Do you understand? I was running Hal Riney and Partners, and I came up through the media track. That had never really been done before, except by a guy named Larry Lamatina a long time ago in a different era. So I was I was a media guy who had run an agency, and that just didn't happen in that era. And so we created I think the culture of Cara was quite unique because we were not established in the United States. We built a battleship. We never had to turn one around.
Right.
That's
But
true.
I'll still make the point you had to get the resources from somewhere.
Yes, and he just approved it. We were publicly traded. One of the nice things
Yeah.
about
Okay.
publicly traded company is access to capital, Tony. We had tons of capital. I was being pushed actually to buy companies, and I had a team. And you're right, I had a team. There's a guy named Paul Greenhalgh that led our acquisition efforts that Ray knows, a guy named Paul Singer, who was my chief of staff, who basically told me every day how stupid I was, which I really appreciated. And because I needed it. You need in a big job, you need a team, and you also need people. I found, because I tend to be a bit, you know, often wrong and never in doubt. So I needed people around me also that would push me, that would also kind of disagree with me. I found disagreement, particularly polite professional disagreement, to be incredibly helpful for
Right.
me.
We had some real good ones. I remember them. I remember, one of the things that I think is great for our audience to keep in mind too, and you just said it, and I'll say it again. You need to surround yourself with people who'll tell you the truth. Because if they're afraid to tell you the truth, and I'll leave it there, in our current
Well,
world.
I think a CEO is a search for the
You need
truth,
that.
Ray. That's really what my job was, the
Yeah.
truth. And I think that's about
Right.
management style. You have to be careful because
Yep.
if you come in too hard, I think at times people will not tell you the truth because they just are a little nervous. You're gonna,
They're shell shocked.
explode on them. So I think you're right. And that's about creating a culture where people are comfortable telling you, you know, the truth. They also tried to create a culture. At least we had at Cara where we gave people a chance. You know,
Yeah.
some of you guys
That's
may
right.
remember. I mean, we had some. Our people were very talented, but many of them were homegrown. You know what I'm saying? So we
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
had a
Tony,
great
when you were
team.
doing the Budweiser stuff at Anheuser-Busch, because sometimes I wind up interviewing Tony because, it's Tony Ponturo. Um, who were some of the guys at AB and gals that, like, you never would have thought they'd have done so well, but somebody saw something and they turned out to be pretty amazing, right?
Well, I mean, uh, you know,
Or was
coming
it
out
all?
of the media department, you had, Peter McLaughlin that went on to be the CEO of the Blues and the CEO of the Seahawks. You had Steve
Yeah.
Margosin go to NBC to run that marketing sort of program. You had,
Yeah.
well, Mark Lamping, who came out of our sports marketing group, ended up being the president of the Cardinals and then now currently the CEO of the Jaguars and has built both the Busch Stadium and MetLife Stadium. Um, Rich Michael is now at NBC, who ran our New York office for about 7 years. You know, helping run Olympic sales.
It's
So,
always fun to watch where people go, isn't it? Right? Because
It
as we
yeah,
is.
know, came
and somewhat to
from
David's
good
point,
stock.
the thing about Bush Media Group was it was a Delaware company. It was an owned company within the division of marketing of Anheuser-Busch. So it was, the value I got as also being on our strategy committee, which was our top 12 people, is you got to understand how to run a company, at least a media company, also how to build a culture, how to figure out how to promote 150 people that would stay for some period of time, and then also understand the bigger business of acquisition, brewery, renovation, brewery expansion, et cetera, et cetera. So I think why we're pushing on this, David, a little bit is that I think more and more as people come into the business, you want to understand the bigger picture. You want to understand all elements of business. Um, and I'm executive chairman now of an agency called Echelon. What I keep saying to them, like the young people will say, well, this is what I do and this is all I know. And I said, not to use myself an example as you have as well, and Ray will as well, is when I went to Anheuser-Busch and was hired as director of media at 30 years old, I have done one thing, buy national TV time. But they said, here, go be our director of media, which is print and outdoor and radio and local teams. And you learn it. You don't say, well, I've only bought national TV. Ray ended up becoming CEO of Raycom, and after was Kara after Raycom or before Raycom? No, it was after
After
Raycom.
we sold Raycom in
After.
2002, I joined David. 2000. Well, I went to OMD first, and then to David in 2004 through seven. Uh, yeah, talk about a pirate ship. Yeah, I think I just realized I've made three pirate moves. Between Raycom Sports, Cara, and Telemundo. I seem to like the pirate boat size better than the big battleships. I didn't
Yeah.
realize that until this conversation.
Well,
I'll
and
tell
what's
you one quick.
interesting, go
I
ahead,
want to just
David.
tell you one quick media planning story. You make me think about it, Tony, when you talk about how you just you came up from the buying side, what we would call activation today, right? And I really came up through the planning side of the business. I was a media planner by trade.
Mm-hmm.
Early, it's you had to innovate. I think because you talked about that. I just want to think about what stories about the ad business make me think about how you innovate and how you just got to figure things out. So I was hired at Young and Rubicam, and I kind of went rapidly through the ranks, and eventually I became the media supervisor pretty early in my career for our largest account at the time in New York, Eastern Airlines. At the time, Eastern was doing about $100 million in ad spend. It's also when you mentioned with Joe, I also had one meeting with Ted Turner on Eastern Airlines, and 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 we were having problems. It was right after airline deregulation, and the CEO of Eastern Airlines was um, was a former Air Force colonel and an astronaut. He was difficult. I won't go through the whole thing, but he kept complaining to my predecessor that he never saw the ads. Right, we're spending $100 million a year. I never see the ads. I never hear the ads. His name was Frank Borman. Colonel Frank Borman was the
Oh.
CEO of Eastern Airlines, well-known guy and astronaut. And so they let the guy before me go, and they put me on the account and said, this guy is rough and he was tough. The industry's changing. And I met him, and he was not particularly nice. I said, maybe you'll figure it out, but I don't know what we're doing with all this money, $100 million. I never see the ads. I don't know what's going on. Tired of you guys at Young and Rubicam. He was not happy, and he was tough. Anyway, I had to think, what was I going to do? Okay, how are you going to get this guy? So what I did, which I went down to the parking lot. And in those days, the CEO has his own parking space. And back then, they would like wash his car and the whole thing. It said like Colonel Borman on it. And I said to the park attendant, I said, is that Colonel Borman's car? And he said, yeah. I think, could I go in? I just like to see what his what radio stations he listens to. He said, no problem. So I went into his car. We turned it on. You have those punch buttons on the radio station. I took down, and the guy like Borman listened to like 2 Christian stations, like a what do you call it? Classical music station. I don't know. As soon as I got back to New York, I bought 24 spot rotation on each of the 6 stations on his radio, right? And full rotations, probably. And the reason he never saw it, no one was ever buying any of these stations. All of a sudden, like 2 weeks later, I got called into his office, and he said, I don't know what you've done, but I'm hearing the ads now. I like you. You're doing well. And but that's how you have to innovate, right? Sometimes you got to
Very
come up
smart.
with a way. And so that's really how
Yeah,
I
I'm going to do
became
that.
kind of.
When I was at OMD, we had Universal Pictures, and I don't know if it was Spielberg, but it was a big Hollywood name, and he did the same thing. Like, I got these movies coming out, and they basically drove the route from his house to the studio, and they slapped roadside billboards along the way, and he'd see him going to work. He's like, oh, God, you guys are awesome, seeing these things.
That's what you have to do. But
Hey,
as
you do
I
something
said,
like
I
that
think
with Budweiser, Tony, for Bush Media. Do you have to do something for August? Did you have to do something for August Bush to make sure he's still out there? I know you told me about
the
camera
life
angles.
we lived, starting with those doctor pagers, is you were always on call. We were 24/7 doctors on call. So at least I was. So if he saw something on the air, I always remember we had our group down at Orlando doing the baseball playoffs, and the Pirates were in it. And the call, so the pager goes off. It's AB security. Call August. You know the number. Why am I seeing Miller signs at Three River Stadium, Pittsburgh, going back to David's hometown? Well, Miller had that stadium, but he said, well, you got to make sure they don't show the signs. And it's like, well, easier said than done. But those are the kind of conversations you would get into. Or we had a lot of these share of voice, share of market things for every market. We really did a lot of analysis on what Miller, Coors, Heineken spent in media, and then what their share of market was versus we had a Sav Sam, as we called it. And I was in China once, and I get a call, and we owned Louisville. Louisville was an owned and operated wholesaler. What's our Sav Sam in Louisville? Well, it's like you're not going to have that at the top of your head. But that was the point. That was the point of detail. And I remember a guy, well, Rich knows a Rich Meyer, who had run our local sports, went to New York. They got hired by Gillette. And when he goes to Gillette, he asks his head of marketing boss, can I have your phone number? And she goes, well, why do you need my phone number? He goes, well, on the weekend we may have something. He goes, no, we're not going to have anything to do on the weekend. But that was the mentality to talk about culture is, all hands on deck, which is why, coming full circle, why these 6 guys in Hilton Head were so connected, because we were always on, because we would get questions that no CEO would ask. A lot of people thought, a CEO, especially in a family tradition, was probably off fishing and hunting all the time, which he did too, but he was a hands-on CEO. So anyway, it's all an interesting biz, but it was, machete in the mouth and going for it. But we should let you guys, before we get too long in the tooth here, if you want to talk about Walmart, go at it.
Well, I was
Well,
just going to say that Ray and I really, and I hope we get a chance to talk about salesmanship and business development and new business pitching, because I think it's the lifeblood of the ad business. And I believe that if an agency's not pitching and winning, you're moving backwards, because you lose clients too. It just happens, right? The bucket is leaky, and mergers happen and things happen. So, I really focused on, you had in Ray Warren, one of the great sales guys of all time, right? I mean, this is a guy that is very, very good in a meeting. And so we really could talk about, Ray and I actually had two experiences together. I hope he'll tell the story. I'll be glad to add it, but we had a story in with beer, by the way, and we really should tell the story about Miller beer, Ray.
yeah.
I know that's going to be tough in front of Tony. You probably never told him
He's
that
never told
story,
this story, so he's teetering
but
on
he
a
should tell that
45-year
one.
relationship. But go ahead.
Okay. He should tell you that one. And then I think, Ray, you should tell the story of in 2005, of June 2005, you had recently taken over as president of Cara USA, and you and I were partnered with Draft FCB. Interpublic had decided they didn't want to use their own media department initiative to pitch the business, and they reached out to Ray and to me to see if we could partner to pitch the Walmart business. This is FCB from Interpublic and the independent Cara pitching at the time one of the biggest accounts in the United States. So, Ray, you pick that up. Would you tell? I think you should quickly, if you can, tell both those stories, because they're illustrative, I think.
All right. Well, I still want to frame it for the audience around surprises, pivots, speed bumps. You got to stay focused, stay positive, keep going. Pirates and battleships don't always win everything, and sometimes you win them and it turns around. So in 3 minutes, I'll try to do both. I'll do two on Walmart, one on Miller. I'll start with Miller, get that out of the way so Tony can think about how mad he'll be.
And we're out of time. Sorry, David.
I could not believe in the 20 years.
I wanted to bring it up because Ponturo, you don't know this story and you'll get a kick out of it.
No, go ahead, Ray. I'm sorry.
That I'm being, that in 20 years I've never told Tony the story. Well, the Miller account was available and we were invited to pitch. And like all good presidents of media agencies who report to a CEO, David Verklin, you go pitch the damn account. We pitched against Starcom. We pitched against Mindshare, Mark Goldstein and Erwin Gottlieb. Jack Clues at Starcom, Media Legends, and then Lolo Cara. And we had some great ideas. This was the one where we were rehearsing till 3 a.m. I said, David, we just got to go to bed now because we're up at 8 to pitch, and we were still revising and doing stuff. David and I were a really good 1-2 punch. I mean, he would open up and the room would kind of have already been half sold, 90% sold. I had to come in and not screw it up. But then we also had 35-year-olds present the business to Miller. We said, we're not going to tell you how great it's going to be and how much time we're going to spend on your account. We're going to give you the team that's actually going to run the Miller business. And they crushed it. So there was a vote afterwards. It was 6 for Cara, 2 for Starcom, 1 for Mindshare. I got a lot of fun out of the 1 for Mindshare, or Group M. And, we're doing the whole transfer of accounts, transactions, what's the deal, how many people, full-time staff. And I get a call from the CEO, because I always had to break the news to David. Hey, we won Miller. Hey, we lost Miller. And Jack Clues, God bless him, did the greatest kick save in the history of, I think, media pitching. He went in and said, you know what they just did? I'll do that. But I'm your agency, been in it for 15 years. I'll cut my rate. No transition, no surprises. And he kept it. And they called me back and said, Ray, this is the hardest call. The word I got from the CEO was long. Andrew Long? Something long.
David Long.
David Long. He said, this is the toughest phone call I've ever had to make. I'm like, oh, great. Tell me. Well, we're going to stay with Starcom. So
anyway, I'll add a little color to that, then we can jump into Walmart. But, in business development, a lot of time, and this was certainly true at Cara when Ray and I were pitching, we had a new business team, Okay. A new business team that work together all the time. Bruce Dendler, a guy named Randy Stone, a bunch of people that Ray would know. And we were very good at it, right? Very good at it. But Ray and I made a decision on this particular pitch to bring the real team, right? Everybody, because what happens with new business, all these great people come, and then once you win the business, they disappear, and the real team. So on this particular pitch, we brought the real team. There were people who had never presented before, right, in new business, and there were people. This was their first time ever, like on a plane,
That's right. We
But
were up
these
till
were
3 in the morning.
and so in the
Yeah.
opening, I tried to say to the team, I said, "Look, this is the real team, okay? And if they stumble a bit, maybe you could give them some encouragement. Oh, maybe every once in a while, as we go through this presentation, you could, smile or give some encouragement. This team's never done this before." Anyway, as Ray said, they rose to the occasion. And the story I want to tell is, when you give people a chance, it's amazing what people will do. And that's really one of the stories of my career is always, sink or swim. When I ask people to sink or swim, 95% of the time they can swim.
And you know what the other side of that is, David? Take a chance, right?
Take a
Okay,
chance.
I've never
That's right.
presented. Get up there and present to Miller. See how
Anyway.
it goes. Nothing
So we
bad.
won that
Ray,
business,
let me
and
ask you
then
a tough question. Let me ask you a tough question. I don't know the answer, so I don't know if I'm walking into a minefield or not. Because you talk about taking a chance, taking a lead. So you're president of Cara, David's CEO, but your career didn't end up at Cara. So what
No.
made you move on?
And David and I have talked about this. I'm a bottom line. Give me a number on the top and give me a number on the bottom. And the role in the agency world is a much more patient, more build the business. You're going to win some and lose some. I just had a struggle with it, and
Okay.
all of a sudden I just decided I just don't see the rest of my. I was 50. I don't see the next 15, 20 years living this life. David had lived it already. I'd spent time at Raycom, ABC, so it was just I'm a bottom line guy. So I want to be responsible for everything. Not we're going to fire you because the CEO likes the guys over at Gray more than the guys at Cara, like whatever. So that was just me. David continues
No,
to
but
remind me I was
that's a
better
good
at.
lesson. I mean, because I think
Yeah,
people, this is a teaching thing, and I think
yeah,
that's a great thing for
absolutely.
here. I mean, Steve
Yeah,
nothing
Bardos,
stays the same. Nothing stays the
yeah.
same. And I
You got it.
left, and after I left, the new guy comes in, and then they sweep clean. They bring in their team. That's the life in
Yeah,
in
the
in
people who
big
think
business.
like something bad's going to happen because they left, that's just they need to spend some more time going inward.
right, right.
So let's try to do a quick 2 minutes
But
because
it
we're
would have
already
been
40.
different. I think it would have been different, in my opinion, Ray. Your career potentially would have been different um,
We kept
had this
Walmart
next
and Miller.
story turned out differently, and it potentially your life could have turned out. You
Well,
may
yeah, I
still
mean
be
that
an
would have
agency
been
guy.
fine. That would have helped the bottom line, right? So David said there'd be a statue in the lobby of both of us if we kept Walmart. Long story short, we won it. We owned it. We killed it. We beat everybody in close. We basically said you should be spending $2 billion a year on advertising, not 700 million, and here's why. So it would have been the most insane piece of business anybody ever had. And then it was in the Wall Street Journal, so it's public knowledge. There was some behavior that wasn't appropriate at the other agency, and they fired the other agency, and they said, Carrie, you guys just worked your ass off. You didn't do anything wrong, so you can repitch it. But we also kind of had this sense of, well, we have to repitch it, but okay. And so we didn't keep it on the second pitch, but we, if everybody just behaved, Mad Men, just take a look. It would have been we would have had the Walmart account and then the Miller account. So, but all things turn out for the best. I say everybody's where they're supposed to be in life. And so, but I loved working with Dave.
I'll just add the same thing with the Miller story. So it's 2000 and it's maybe June of 2005. So a little over 20 years ago, the Walmart business is being managed by a company called GSD&M. A guy named Roy Spence was the CEO, one of the best new business guys, they say, in the history of the ad business. Great presenter, GSD&M. And so we're partnering up with Howard Draft and Draft Direct to pitch the Walmart business. A guy named Tony Wiseman, great, well-known guy in the business. Julie Ream was the CEO. She'd just come from GM. And Anyway, we did an incredible pitch, and I think it was as good as ever. We had terrific creative. The media was really great. But in the end, you may know with Walmart, you're not allowed to entertain. Walmart's not allowed to go to dinner with. There are very strict rules about how you can work with Walmart. And our partner agency had thrown a dinner and given her a bottle of case of vodka and a bunch of other stuff, which we all did in the business. We all went out to dinner with clients in business because you wanted to get to know them, right? You wanted to have some chemistry, right? Anyway, that was against the rules. But my favorite part of this story was Ray and I ended up in a meeting after winning it, but now it being contentious because some rules were broken. Ray and I ended up in a room with Eduardo Castro Wright, the president of Walmart North America. Look at Ray, he's laughing. And this guy would really had come to the conclusion that we needed to do a repitch. We need to do this again. And he wanted to get rid of our creative partner. Anyway, long story short, I just will never forget this. Ray's going to laugh at this. He was kind of picking apart our media plan. And I'll just never forget, back then magazines were big, okay? 2006, like the magazine industry was still in pretty good shape. And so we had magazines in the media plan. And most of it was TV. But he turned to Howard Draft was presenting the creative and he said, what are we doing with all these magazine ads? Like, why are we doing ads in magazines? Like why are we spending money in magazines? And Howard flipped it over to me and said, David, do you want to answer that? And I looked at Eduardo and I said, well, right now, Walmart sells about 45% of all the magazines in North America are sold at your store. So there's probably a pretty good chance that since 45% of magazines back then, that's how big Walmart was. 45% of all magazine sales were being done out of Walmart. So those were the he didn't really like that answer, but he accepted that there probably needed to be magazines in the media plan. We went all the way to the wall with this thing. And had we won this, Ray Warren would have been one of the most famous guys in the media services business. He would have had two big pitches and won them both back to back. Ray could still be, he might be the worldwide CEO of Aegis by now, had those two things gone differently. So those are two real stories, both with Ray Warren.
Yeah. So
Ray, bring us home. I think we're probably at the time, right?
Yeah. Listen, I think everybody winds up where they're supposed to be. I loved that period of time, and I loved the subsequent 20 years after that. So I think that's part of the thing that we talk about is the journey and the pivots and the surprises. And that to me is what this is about. It's about the three of us who have been around, trying to help those who are either some are in the middle of their career, some are towards the end, some are just starting out. And it's one foot in front of the other. Just keep your head up and a smile on your face and know that it's not personal. It's just business.
I will say,
go ahead, Dave.
Just one last thing, since we talked about the media services business. I will tell you that, because we've lost some people, I will tell you that before we leave, you could ask other people, because you'll have other agency CEOs, former agency CEOs on this podcast. But if you asked me about the Mount Rushmore of the modern media services business, I'd give you four names: Mike Moore, Dennis Holt, Erwin Gottlieb, and Renetta McCann, in my opinion. So just so you know, it's now for all of history that people know. If there was four people that created the media services revolution in this country, it would be Mike Moore, Erwin Gottlieb, Dennis Holt, and in my view, Renetta McCann.
Well, that's legendary. And then
in our little space, Ray, in the media agency space.
You'd be in there somewhere, Verklin. Tony, thank you. David, thank you. A little bit of history, a little bit of walk down memory lane, but I think a lot of learning in general, especially about, the way you're seeing the business, the way you've looked at the business. Tony, congrats on your reunion and all that. Anything you want to throw out there, or you want me to take it all the way home?
No, you take it. The only thing I want to interject, because there's so much bad examples in the world today about how to do business, how to conduct yourself, and you guys just hit on a couple of things in the agency business that were not up and up. And there was probably more than that. And it probably turned you off rate to the business. And I want our young people to understand, and I tell my students all the time, we spend $1 billion a year. There was never any, I say there was never any kickback. There was never any ill propriety. And I said, you know why? Because I never asked and our people never asked. And we were audited within an inch of degree because we spent that money in our company. And so I really don't want people to think that the business or any business is a sleazy business, because in some cases it can be, but I want our young people to just call, part of the expression, bullshit on that. That's not how you have to be it. And if you're at a place where you see that, get the hell out. Anyway, it just triggered because both of those examples, you lost business, because of the wrong reasons, particularly the Walmart. You got punished because another agency was doing stuff behind the scenes and you got punished. All right. Come on. I got to go.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thanks.
Great to be with you guys. I enjoyed the conversation very much.
Really great having you, David.